In 1822, the same year that Brazil proclaimed its independence, when the echoes of freedom mingled with the rigid conservatism of the Catholic Church and the heavy hand of the aristocracy, a scandal exploded that not even the most creative playwright could have invented. A scandal so devastating that, for decades, no one dared to speak of it aloud. A scandal that mixed wealth, faith, betrayal, and a forbidden passion capable of destroying families, humiliating the powerful, and shaking the very foundations of the Church. The story is still whispered in ruins and in family legends, and those who dare to recall it confess that their skin crawls. For in the midst of celebrations of a new nation, what no one expected was that a bride of fortune would abandon everything, her gold, her name, her inheritance, and escape with a priest. And what followed was such a wound to the honor of the time that it ended with the estate in flames, set ablaze by those who most should have preached forgiveness. Imagine for a moment the stage, the interior of the empire, where plantations stretched as far as the eye could see, where coffee had not yet dethroned sugar, and the wealth of families depended on enslaved hands and alliances sealed by marriages calculated to the smallest detail. It was in this atmosphere that one of the region's most powerful men prepared the wedding of his only daughter, a marriage that would unite fortunes, estates, and names. For him, it was not a matter of love, but of legacy. The daughter would become the wife of a young landowner, ensuring that the family name would be preserved, expanding networks of influence, and guaranteeing a place close to the imperial court that was being formed in Rio de Janeiro. The preparations were grand, the expectations immense. Musicians, flowers, a church adorned as if it were a royal palace. The ceremony was to be the event of the year. But behind the silks, jewels, and apparent devotion, something stirred in silence. The bride, who in this story we shall call Clara, bore within her chest a storm no veil could cover. From childhood she had been taught that her duty was to obey, to smile, to accept the fate arranged by her father. But deep down, in stolen glances, in secret confessions, in the subtle crossing of paths within the estate, Clara had already surrendered to someone who could never be part of her destiny, Father Miguel, the parish priest who, under the cassock and the weight of sacred vows, hid a man of burning faith and equally burning desires. Miguel was young, eloquent, respected by the people, and feared by the powerful for the courage with which he preached against corruption and the sins of greed. He came from Portugal, sent to bring order to a parish in turmoil. But soon he won hearts with his words, his presence, and his empathy with the most humble. And it was precisely this empathy that made him closer to Clara's family, always invited to dinners, always requested to bless the estate, always present in moments of prayer. What no one suspected was that the daughter of the house, in each blessing, felt her heart racing in a way she could no longer control. At first it was nothing more than innocent conversations, furtive exchanges of words during walks in the garden, confessions whispered at the confessional, where the sacred veil of secrecy protected sins and desires. But soon innocence gave way to something far greater. Behind the sacristy doors, in the solitude of the chapel at dusk, the impossible happened. Priest and heiress, bound by an invisible chain stronger than all social rules, plunged into a forbidden love. Clara, imprisoned in a life where she was treated as an asset to be negotiated, saw in Miguel a freedom she had never dreamed of. He, torn between the weight of his vows and the beating of his heart, resisted, fought against temptation, but ended up surrendering completely. Nights of anguish turned into nights of passion. Secret letters, hidden in the pages of prayer books, became the link of a relationship that, if discovered, would mean ruin for both. While the family celebrated the grand wedding, Clara's heart screamed in despair. The groom chosen for her, a young farmer, son of another powerful family, saw the union as the crowning of his ambitions. He had land, cattle, slaves, and, with marriage, would have prestige and political access. But he never had Clara's heart. Each day closer to the ceremony was a dagger in her chest. The church was adorned. Bells rang rehearsals for the great day. The town murmured in excitement about the union. But only Clara knew, she would never accept that destiny. She would not be sacrificed on the altar of wealth. In her mind, only one plan grew, to flee. Not alone, not abandoned to chance. But hand in hand with the man who, by law and religion, could never belong to her. On the eve of the wedding, under the starry sky, Clara and Miguel met in the old chapel at the back of the estate. She, trembling, wearing the cloak that disguised her escape, he, with the cassock heavy as chains, but eyes burning with determination. The decision was made. The marriage would not happen. Clara would abandon everything, the fortune, the family, the name, and escape with him. It was not only an act of love, but a cry of revolt against a system that used her body as currency and his soul as a pawn. When the wedding day dawned, the entire parish was ready. Men in their best clothes, women adorned as for a royal ceremony. The altar overflowed with flowers, and the groom, satisfied, awaited the entrance of his bride. But the bells tolled, and time passed. The whispers began. The guests shifted impatiently. The father, proud, straightened his posture, not yet realizing the nightmare about to fall upon him. And then the news came, Clara was gone. She was not in her room, not in the manor, not in the gardens. She had vanished. And worse, she had been seen leaving at dawn, accompanied by the parish priest. The chaos was indescribable. The groom, humiliated, turned red with fury. The father, disbelieving, shouted that it was a lie. The guests exchanged glances, astonished. But the rumor grew stronger with each new witness. The heiress had fled. And not with just anyone, but with the priest himself. The scandal spread like wildfire. From whispers in the church, it spread to the streets, from the streets to the city, and from there to the corridors of the clergy. It was more than a shame, it was a crime. The father swore he would not rest until he found them. He put overseers, soldiers, and mercenaries on the trail. He offered rewards. He demanded the annulment of Miguel's ordination, the excommunication of his daughter, and the return of what was his. But the greatest humiliation was yet to come. For when the bishop received the news, he did not hesitate. He declared the estate cursed. And as punishment, to erase the stain of sin, he ordered the unimaginable, that the manor be burned to the ground, turned into ashes, so that no stone would remain of the place where such sacrilege had been committed. The flames consumed not only the walls and furniture, but the pride of an entire family. The fire rose to the skies, lighting the night like a macabre festival. Slaves, overseers, and guests watched the empire of riches collapse into cinders. And in every crackle of wood, in every scream of despair, echoed the weight of a love forbidden to exist. But Clara and Miguel, already far away, did not see the flames. They only felt, deep inside, the certainty that there was no turning back. Each step taken on the path of escape was also a step into exile, into the unknown, into a future that might not forgive them, but at least would belong to them. And it is from here, from this point of no return, that the story takes on proportions that defy logic, transforming itself into legend, into ghostly memories, into secrets buried in time and revealed only in whispers that, even today, when told, cause chills in those who dare to listen. The first days of exile were marked by both fear and euphoria. Fear of discovery, of the relentless hands of Clara's father reaching them even in the most remote corners of the empire. But also euphoria, because for the first time, Clara walked freely, not as an heir locked behind silk and duty, but as a woman holding the hand of the man she had chosen. And for Miguel, though every sunrise reminded him of the vows he had broken, every glance into Clara's eyes gave him the certainty that love itself was a prayer far purer than any he had ever uttered from the pulpit. They traveled through villages where no one knew their names, where the scandal had not yet spread. Clara, stripped of jewels and lace, dressed in plain garments, could pass for a common traveler. Miguel, without his cassock, carried only a small wooden cross, hidden under his shirt, as if even God needed to be kept secret. Together, they invented new identities, brother and sister, husband and wife, or even pilgrims searching for land. Every role they played was a mask that hid the forbidden truth. But rumors traveled faster than horses. Soon, in the taverns, voices spoke of the millionaire's bride who ran away with the priest. Stories mutated with every retelling. Some said Clara had been bewitched, others swore Miguel had stolen church treasures to fund their escape. The more people invented, the more dangerous it became for them to linger. Each night, Clara wondered if the sound outside their window was merely the wind, or the footsteps of those hunting them. One evening, as they rested in the barn of a poor farmer who offered them shelter in exchange for prayers, Miguel confessed his torment. "Clara," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I fear I have damned us both. My soul is condemned, and yours branded by shame. Perhaps this is not God's will." But Clara, with fire in her gaze, answered, "What greater sin, Miguel, to love and be true to one's heart, or to live a life of lies and chains? If there is punishment, let it be ours. But let no one decide for us what love should be." Her words silenced his doubts for that night, but fate was not so easily appeased. For behind them, a trail of anger burned. Clara's father, humiliated beyond reason, had placed a price on their heads so high that even loyal servants turned into informants. And the bishop, unwilling to let the church's authority be mocked, sent letters to parishes across the province demanding that Father Miguel be captured and tried as an apostate. It was no longer just a family matter. It had become a matter of faith, of honor, of politics. In an empire being born amid independence, where every gesture carried the weight of a nation defining itself, the scandal of a runaway bride and a priest had become a symbol of rebellion and corruption alike. To some, Clara and Miguel were villains. To others, martyrs. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the lovers began to realize, their story was no longer theirs alone. It had entered the bloodstream of a country in transformation. And though they longed only for a quiet life together, destiny had already chosen otherwise. The months of wandering carried them deeper into the interior, to villages where the reach of the church weakened and where news from the coast arrived only in fragments, distorted like whispers carried by wind. There, they found brief moments of peace, Clara tending to gardens with peasant women, Miguel offering counsel and blessings to the sick and weary, though always in secret, never under the title of priest. For a fleeting while, they tasted the illusion of a life that might have been theirs if the world had been kinder. But illusions rarely endure. One night, while the couple lodged at an inn on the edge of a mining town, a drunken traveler at the next table began to sing a mocking ballad about the heiress and the fallen priest. The laughter that followed was cruel, the verses venomous. Clara froze, Miguel tightened his jaw. Their faces were not recognized, but the tale had reached even here. They could not escape the story, because they were the story. Miguel began to sense the tightening of a noose. At markets, strangers' eyes lingered too long. In churches, sermons carried veiled condemnations of those who defied both God and family. And when, one morning, Clara found a crudely written note slipped beneath their door, "The price for you is gold, and gold makes men speak," they knew their time in hiding was dwindling. The betrayal, when it came, was quiet and treacherous. A farmer who had once shared bread with them, pressed by debt and tempted by reward, sent word to the authorities. Soldiers arrived at dusk, iron boots echoing in the fields. Clara and Miguel fled into the forest, clutching each other as the dogs barked and the men shouted. For hours they ran, branches cutting Clara's arms, Miguel dragging her when her legs faltered. By some miracle, they evaded capture, but the chase left them broken, breathless, and more certain than ever. They were hunted not as lovers, but as fugitives condemned by both altar and law. Still, love made them defiant. In the shadows of exile, they carved a life on scraps of hope. Miguel would whisper psalms into Clara's ear as they lay beneath the stars, turning scripture into secret poetry. Clara, once surrounded by silks and servants, learned to bake coarse bread over embers and to wash her dress in rivers. Each act of survival was a vow renewed, not before God or men, but before each other. Yet destiny is merciless. In 1823, almost a year after their flight, the empire's tide shifted. Brazil's independence had birthed both new freedoms and new persecutions, and stories like theirs became fodder for political and religious fire. Priests thundered from pulpits that their scandal mirrored the chaos of a world losing its order. For Clara's father, who had not abandoned the hunt, this was his vindication. He sent riders once more, armed not only with weapons but with the authority of church and crown. It was only a matter of time before paths would cross again, before the lovers' sanctuary would collapse. And when it did, the price they would pay would stain the earth with more than ashes. The sun rose over the rugged hills, casting long shadows that mingled with the morning mist. Clara and Miguel, exhausted from their flight, found refuge in a narrow valley carved by a river that sang a quiet lullaby. Here, the world seemed paused, holding its breath as if respecting the fragile peace of two souls in exile. The forest around them offered concealment, and for the first time in months, they dared to consider that perhaps they might endure. Miguel, still pale from hunger and lack of sleep, knelt by the river to drink, and Clara joined him, her fingers brushing the water and then his hand in a gesture neither could articulate fully. "We are not yet free," Miguel murmured, his voice heavy with worry. "The empire will not forgive. Your father will not forgive. And the church, God forgive me, he will not forgive." Clara pressed her forehead to his shoulder. "Then we shall forgive ourselves, Miguel. That is all that matters." Her words, simple and defiant, carried a weight that seemed to bend the very air around them. For that moment, the valley became a sanctuary, a space where past and future dissolved into the present. Weeks turned into months. The lovers adapted to their new life with remarkable tenacity. Miguel, using his knowledge of herbs and the meager medical lessons from the seminary, tended to the sick villagers who lived at the fringes of the valley. He never identified himself as a priest, instead, he was a healer, a wandering man who offered solace without sermons. Clara, hands calloused from labor, learned the rhythms of the land, planting, harvesting, cooking, mending clothes. She discovered a freedom that wealth had never provided, the autonomy to decide, the right to fail, the simple joy of choosing one's path. Yet, peace is a fragile guest. The empire's agents were relentless. One evening, as the sky bled into twilight, Clara spotted a horseman moving against the shadows. She seized Miguel's arm. "They have found us," she whispered. Fear, raw and immediate, surged through her veins. They fled deeper into the forest, the undergrowth tearing at their garments and scratching their skin, until they reached a hidden cave known only to the oldest of villagers. Here, they hid, hearts pounding, listening to the distant clatter of hooves and the murmured shouts of men who believed in law and order more than in love. In the solitude of the cave, Miguel pressed a hand against Clara's face. "No matter what comes," he said, his voice fierce, "we are bound. Death, exile, even the church's wrath cannot undo this." Clara nodded, tears streaking her dirt-smudged cheeks, but a small, rebellious smile appeared. "Then let the world burn. We have each other." Time became a strange companion. Days blended into nights, and seasons passed almost unnoticed. Letters never arrived, and news from the outside world reached them only through travelers who passed through the valley, unaware of the fugitives they carried tales to. And the empire continued to build its narrative, the heiress lost, the priest apostate, the estate destroyed. Each retelling added embellishments, Clara's supposed cruelty, Miguel's alleged sacrilege. And each story, twisted or true, added weight to the legend they were becoming. Despite the constant threat, there were moments of extraordinary beauty. One night, as a meteor shower streaked across the heavens, Clara and Miguel lay on a hill overlooking the valley. The sky was ablaze with light, and for the first time, Miguel allowed himself to hope. "Perhaps the stars forgive us," he whispered. Clara laughed softly, the sound trembling with a joy that had been foreign for so long. "Then we are forgiven," she said, her hand finding his in the darkness. Yet destiny remained inexorable. Word of a reward for their capture had grown too large to ignore. The men who pursued them were not mere servants or local enforcers, they were seasoned trackers, driven by gold, loyalty, and the unyielding pressure of the church. One evening, as the lovers prepared a meager supper, Clara noticed a change in the wind, a subtle shift, a silence in the usual rustle of the trees. Her instincts screamed, and Miguel's hand tightened around hers. "They are close," he said, eyes scanning the shadows. "Too close." They packed swiftly, leaving behind the semblance of a home they had begun to build. Under the cover of darkness, they moved through the forest, silent and swift, until the first hints of dawn painted the sky with pale light. Exhaustion gnawed at them, but fear drove every step. They had become shadows themselves, living in the interstices of the empire, unseen and almost unreal. One morning, as they crested a hill overlooking a small village, they found signs of recent settlement, smoke curling from chimneys, tracks leading to the river. Clara knelt to examine the soil. "Not just a village," she whispered. "This is an outpost of some kind. Guards, maybe. We must be cautious." Miguel nodded, scanning the horizon. "We cannot risk confrontation. Not now, not ever. We must find a place where they cannot follow." Their journey took them across rivers swollen from spring rains, over hills where the wind cut like blades, and through forests so dense that daylight barely touched the ground. They learned to survive on what the land provided, to read the weather and the movement of clouds, to hide in plain sight among wandering shepherds and reclusive farmers. Each day tested them in body and spirit, yet each night reaffirmed the bond that had drawn them from the altar into exile. And still, the empire pursued. Stories of Clara and Miguel reached the ears of those in Rio de Janeiro. Whispers in salons, in the corridors of power, hinted at a growing legend, that love had defied wealth, family, and faith, that a priest had abandoned God for a woman, that an heiress had fled not into obscurity, but into a life of rebellion. The scandal that had begun with a single wedding had evolved into a symbol, one that people debated with fear and fascination alike. One evening, in a remote glade, Miguel halted. "Clara," he said, his voice low, almost reverent, "I have heard tales of a settlement, far to the north, beyond the mountains, where no one asks questions and the past has little power. Perhaps we could find sanctuary there." Clara's eyes, weary yet bright, met his. "Then we go," she said simply. "No matter the cost, no matter the pursuit, that is our path." So they moved again, carrying nothing but each other and the fragile hope that one day, perhaps, they might live without the shadow of those who sought to punish them. Every step forward was a triumph and a defiance, a statement to the world that love, however condemned, could carve a place even in the most unforgiving landscape. The seasons continued their cycle, indifferent to human affairs, and Clara and Miguel's lives became a rhythm of survival and secret joy. They learned to speak in coded gestures, to share meals with villagers who knew nothing of their true identities, to sleep beneath the stars with the knowledge that every dawn might bring danger. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the trees, they allowed themselves to dream. They dreamed of a small house by a river, of children with Miguel's eyes and Clara's laughter, of a life unchained from the expectations of wealth and the dogma of faith. And even though the world might never allow such a life, in their hearts, they nurtured it like a sacred flame, unseen, but undying. As the year of their exile drew on, the empire's attention began to falter, distracted by wars, politics, and new scandals. The immediate threat diminished, but the weight of their past never fully lifted. Each letter intercepted, each stranger's glance, reminded them that the world was wide, but not wide enough to contain a love that had defied it. In quiet moments, Miguel would speak of forgiveness, not the churches, not societies, but the kind that comes from accepting one's choices, no matter the condemnation. Clara would hold his hand and say, "We are already forgiven, for we chose truth over chains." And in that truth, they found a freedom the empire could never destroy. They were no longer simply the runaway heiress and the priest, they were a living testament to the power of love and defiance. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, they walked it together, step by step, heart to heart, into the unknown. The legend of Clara and Miguel grew in the shadows. Travelers told of them in hushed tones, some claiming to have seen them at the edge of the forest, others swearing they had heard the whispers of a woman and a man whose love could not be tamed. And as the years passed, the story took on an almost mythic quality, a tale of passion, courage, and rebellion that no flames, no laws, and no ecclesiastical decree could ever erase. The couple, now hardened by months of flight and exile, understood that the world had changed, but they had changed too. Every danger, every flight, every whispered rumor had forged them into something enduring. And though they knew the empire's reach could still touch them, though their past was a chain they could never fully sever, they also knew that their love, impossible, condemned, unrelenting, was theirs alone. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley, and Clara and Miguel paused atop a ridge, looking out over a land vast and indifferent. Miguel spoke softly, almost to himself, "Do you think we will ever find peace?" Clara squeezed his hand, her gaze steady. "Peace is not given, Miguel. It is taken." And we will take it, together. And so, with the stars beginning to pierce the twilight, they continued their journey, a path fraught with danger and wonder, their hearts beating in defiance of the empire, the church, and the rigid world they had left behind. Time, relentless as ever, would continue to test them, but Clara and Miguel had already learned the truth. Love, once seized with courage, could illuminate even the darkest exile, and nothing, not fire, not pursuit, not fate, could fully extinguish the flame they carried within. Oh ChatGPT Ds. Night fell like a velvet curtain over the hills, and Clara and Miguel crouched beneath the boughs of an ancient oak, listening to the whispers of the forest. The wind carried scents of pine, wet earth, and the faint smoke of distant hearths. Each sound was a potential threat, each shadow a hidden enemy. Yet, in that precarious moment, they allowed themselves a breath, a single, fragile exhalation of relief. Miguel pulled a small bundle from his satchel, a loaf of bread, hardened by travel but still nourishing. He broke it in two and handed a piece to Clara. She took it with a nod, her fingers brushing his. "We are still here," she murmured. "Still together. Still free, if only by a thread." Miguel studied the horizon. "The threads grow thinner each day. Our pursuers are relentless. Yet, there may be a way to vanish entirely, to become shadows even in the eyes of the empire." He traced the outline of a map, sketched hastily in the dirt with a stick. "Beyond these mountains, there is a valley few dare enter. The villages there are self-contained, wary of outsiders, and the priests rarely venture. If we reach it, we might build a life without constant fear." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "And if they follow?" "They cannot," Miguel replied with certainty that belied his own fear. "Not unless they are fools. And even fools tire eventually." They rested briefly, letting the darkness cloak them. Stars shimmered above, indifferent to human affairs, as if the universe itself had grown accustomed to the tragedies and triumphs of mortals. The cool night air carried a whisper of freedom, fragile yet insistent. Dawn found them moving again, careful, measured, avoiding trails and settlements. Each step was both liberation and act of defiance. In their quiet moments, they spoke in hushed tones of dreams, a modest home by the river, children who would never know the weight of aristocratic expectations, and mornings spent in the simple acts of survival rather than the rigid ceremonies of wealth and power. Days later, as they descended into a hidden valley veiled by cliffs and thick vegetation, they encountered a small community. The inhabitants were wary at first, their eyes sharp, measuring the strangers for deception or danger. Clara and Miguel presented themselves as travelers, humble and respectful, careful to avoid any trace of their past identities. They brought no gold, no jewels, no markers of the life they had abandoned. Weeks passed. The villagers began to accept them, cautiously, drawn by Miguel's gentle healing of the sick and Clara's industrious work in the fields and kitchens. For the first time in over a year, they felt a fragile sense of belonging. They were not yet free from fear, but they were hidden, their story a secret whispered only to the stars. Yet even in this hidden haven, the shadows of their past lingered. Clara often awoke with the sense of being watched, or Miguel would pause mid-step, ears straining for a distant hoofbeat or the faint rustle of pursuers. They could not escape the empire entirely, the reach of wealth, honor, and faith stretched further than they could ever imagine. One evening, as a crimson sun dipped behind the cliffs, Miguel and Clara sat beside a quiet stream, washing the day's sweat and grime from their skin. Miguel reached for her hand. "We are not safe," he said quietly, "but we are together. That has to be enough for now." Clara met his gaze. "It is enough. For everything else, we will fight as we always have. Together." And fight they did. Over the following months, they learned the rhythms of the hidden valley, when the river flooded, when hunters passed through, when storms struck the cliffs. They became part of the land, blending into the shadows of trees and the folds of the hills. Each day was survival, each night a reaffirmation of their bond. Yet fate, relentless and unyielding, was far from done with them. Rumors of the runaway heiress and the apostate priest, carried by wandering traders and opportunistic travelers, reached the ears of men loyal to her father and the church. Stories were exaggerated, some claimed they had stolen treasures, others that they had committed blasphemies, and yet more whispered that they had the protection of unknown powers. One night, a group of strangers arrived at the edge of the village, cloaked and wary. Clara noticed them first, eyes narrowing as she clutched Miguel's arm. "Hunters," she said, voice trembling but resolute. Miguel stood, tension coiling in his muscles. "We cannot confront them openly. If they discover us, the valley itself may be compromised." They retreated into the forest, silent as phantoms. The hunters passed near the village, questioning, probing, but ultimately failing to uncover the hidden paths Miguel had learned from old maps and local guides. It was a narrow escape, one that reminded them both of the fragility of their existence. Days turned to weeks, and the intensity of pursuit gradually diminished, but the threat was never fully gone. Clara and Miguel came to understand that exile was not merely a place, but a condition of the heart. No matter how far they traveled, how deeply they hid, their love would forever exist under the shadow of an empire that would never forgive their defiance. Still, the valley offered small joys. Clara planted a garden of herbs and vegetables, her hands learning the satisfaction of creation unbound by orders or expectation. Miguel tended to the sick, often speaking in coded prayers that only he and Clara could understand, blending faith with secrecy. Nights were filled with quiet conversation, laughter, and moments of stolen intimacy beneath the indifferent gaze of the stars. And slowly, the two of them began to envision a future beyond mere survival. Not a return to their past lives, that was impossible, but a life carved from the raw wilderness of freedom, built on the foundation of love and defiance. Each day of exile became a testament, that even in the shadow of the empire, even under the relentless pursuit of a society bound by law, wealth, and faith, two hearts could claim a sovereignty all their own. It was during one of these quiet nights, as the moon rose full and bright over the cliffs, that Miguel spoke with a tone both reverent and resolute. "We may be hunted, Clara, but we are not broken. Every step we take is our defiance, every breath our victory. One day, perhaps, we will not only survive, we will thrive." Clara leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his chest and the steady rhythm of his heart. "Then we move forward," she said softly, "into the unknown, with nothing but each other and the certainty that love itself can outlast any empire." And so, as the stars wheeled overhead and the world slept unaware of the fugitives in the valley, Clara and Miguel rose, hands clasped, ready to continue their journey through forests, mountains, and rivers, into a future that was theirs alone, forged by courage, passion, and an unyielding will to be together, no matter the cost. The first light of morning filtered through the dense canopy, painting the forest floor with streaks of gold. Clara and Miguel moved cautiously, their feet silent on the moss-covered earth. Each step was measured, each sound a potential betrayal. They had learned to trust the forest's rhythm, to read its signs, the broken twig, the startled bird, the faint rustle that could mean either prey or predator. As they descended into a narrow ravine, the valley opened before them, a hidden expanse cradled by cliffs and dotted with small, thatched huts. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the faint sound of children laughing echoed faintly across the distance. This hidden community, untouched by the prying eyes of the empire, offered a fragile hope. Miguel's eyes softened as he looked at Clara. "Here," he whispered, "we may finally have a chance to rest, to build something that is ours." The villagers watched them with wary curiosity. It was clear that outsiders were rare here, and travelers with foreign airs even rarer. Clara, sensing their suspicion, approached slowly, bowing her head. "We are humble travelers, seeking only shelter for a time," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her chest. Miguel remained beside her, silent but attentive, his presence radiating calm. Days turned into weeks. The villagers began to accept them, drawn by Miguel's skill in healing minor injuries and illnesses and Clara's ability to aid in planting, cooking, and tending livestock. For the first time in over a year, they felt the possibility of belonging. Their lives were still shadowed by caution, yet in the routine of tending fields and caring for the sick, they discovered a fragile rhythm. Even in this relative peace, Clara remained vigilant. She woke before dawn to scout the surrounding hills, listening for the distant clatter of horses or the suspicious chatter of travelers. Miguel taught her to track subtle signs in the land, to read footprints in mud, to detect the faint traces of a campfire long extinguished. Survival had become second nature, their exile molding them into beings attuned to danger. One evening, as the sky burned red with the setting sun, Miguel led Clara to a secluded glade by the river. The water sparkled like molten gold. He knelt, cupping the liquid in his hands, and offered it to her. "We are alive," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "And for as long as the world allows, we will remain so. Together." Clara drank, feeling the cool water chase away the dust and exhaustion. She placed her hand over his, holding it tightly. "Together," she echoed, her voice resolute. "Even if the empire never forgives us, even if the church curses us, we are ours to protect." As the months passed, they expanded their hidden existence. Clara built a small garden, experimenting with herbs and vegetables, learning to coax life from the stubborn earth. Miguel quietly tended to those who sought his aid, never revealing the full truth of his identity. In the safety of the valley, they allowed themselves brief joys, the taste of fresh bread, the laughter of children, and the warmth of a fire on cold nights. Yet, the past never truly let go. Rumors of their survival trickled through distant towns, carried by traders and travelers, some true, some exaggerated. Tales of a runaway heiress and a priest who defied God and family spread, shaping a legend that grew with each retelling. The empire's reach, though distant, was a persistent shadow. Clara and Miguel understood that vigilance must be eternal, the world outside the valley would never forget them. One night, as the moon rose full and silver, Miguel spoke of the future. "We cannot hide forever," he said. "But perhaps there is a way to secure our freedom, to build a life beyond the shadows of pursuit." Clara listened, hope flickering in her chest. "Tell me," she urged. "There are settlements further north," he explained, "where the authority of the empire is weak, and the church's influence barely touches. If we can reach them, we may carve a life that is truly ours, a life where our love can flourish without fear." Clara nodded, determination blazing in her eyes. "Then we go. We have survived this long. We can endure more. Together, always together." The decision made, they began preparations. Miguel mapped the safest routes through forests and mountains. Clara gathered provisions, hidden carefully to avoid notice. Each night, they practiced moving silently, learning to vanish as if the earth itself had claimed them. As the first hints of spring touched the valley, they set out once more, hearts heavy with the weight of exile yet lifted by the certainty of each other. The path was treacherous, rivers swollen with melting snow, cliffs slick with rain, forests dense and unyielding. Every day tested their endurance, every night demanded courage. Still, in moments stolen between survival and fear, they whispered dreams of a home built with their own hands, of children who would know love but not the chains of aristocracy or the harsh judgment of priests. The thought sustained them, a quiet flame against the cold darkness of the world. And the empire? It continued its endless search, sending riders, posting notices, and spreading rumors. Yet Clara and Miguel, forged by flight and hardened by love, remained elusive. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. They had become part of the land itself, shadows, whispers, and memories of two people who refused to bow to a world that demanded obedience over the heart's desire. Night after night, beneath the indifferent stars, they clung to each other and to the fragile hope that somewhere beyond the forests and mountains, a life awaited them. A life unchained. A life they could call their own. The journey northward tested them in ways neither Clara nor Miguel could have anticipated. The forests grew denser, the mountains steeper, and the nights colder. They slept under the open sky whenever possible, wrapping themselves in cloaks that had become thin from months of travel. Hunger gnawed at them on some days, and exhaustion on others, yet the thought of a sanctuary kept their spirits alive. One afternoon, as they descended a rocky ridge, Clara spotted movement ahead. Figures appeared through the haze of dust rising from a distant path. Miguel's hand went instinctively to hers. "Travelers," he whispered, his voice tense, "or hunters. We cannot risk it." They altered their path, circling around the ridge to avoid the unknown. The valley below was vast and dotted with small farms, some abandoned, some showing signs of life. Miguel led Clara toward a river that cut through the land, reasoning that water sources were less likely to be watched, and offered the promise of fish, fresh drinking water, and concealment. As night fell, they huddled beneath the canopy of a wide oak. Miguel whispered the psalms he had memorized, not as prayer but as comfort, a rhythm that steadied their frayed nerves. Clara leaned against him, her body trembling from cold and fatigue. "Do you think they will ever stop hunting us?" she asked. Miguel shook his head. "No. Not while your father lives and the church still wields its power. But the hunt is part of the world we left behind. Here, we are learning another rhythm, one of survival, one of our own making." In the following days, they encountered small communities of farmers and hermits, cautious but willing to trade food and information. Miguel's skill in healing and Clara's industriousness slowly earned the trust of a few, though always with the caveat of secrecy. They learned to speak sparingly of themselves, to invent backstories that would protect them from curiosity or suspicion. One evening, while preparing a meal of wild vegetables and river fish, Miguel shared a fragment of hope he had kept hidden. "There is a settlement further north, beyond the range of the Empire's patrols, where authority is weak and the church seldom intervenes. If we can reach it, we may find a true sanctuary." Clara's eyes shone. "Then we go. Nothing will stop us. Not hunger, not fear, not even the world itself." Weeks of treacherous travel followed. They crossed rivers swollen with spring rains, scaled cliffs slick with ice from the previous winter, and navigated forests so thick that daylight barely reached the ground. Every step tested their endurance, every night demanded courage, yet each challenge also strengthened their bond. They became inseparable not only in heart but in spirit, moving as one entity, their survival dependent on perfect coordination and trust. Yet danger was never far. Strangers occasionally appeared on distant ridges, eyes glinting with suspicion or malice. Rumors of the runaway heiress and the apostate priest had traveled faster than they had imagined. Traders, merchants, and wandering priests spoke of them in whispers, embellishing the tale with each retelling. Some said Clara had bewitched Miguel, others that Miguel had stolen sacred relics. The legend grew, and with it, the danger. One night, while resting beside a mountain stream, Miguel took Clara's hand in his. "We are close," he said. "I can feel it. Just beyond these mountains lies the valley where we may finally breathe freely, where the world's reach cannot touch us." Clara pressed her forehead to his. "Then we endure a little longer," she said. "We have survived everything so far. We can survive this too." The following days were grueling. They navigated narrow passes, avoided patrols, and relied on their wits to find food and shelter. The mountains tested their limits, but each summit brought a glimpse of hope, a valley below, a ribbon of river, a cluster of trees that suggested human habitation. Finally, after nearly a year of ceaseless flight, they reached the edge of a hidden valley, shielded by cliffs and dense forest. Smoke curled lazily from small huts, and the faint laughter of children carried on the wind. Miguel and Clara exchanged a long, silent look. This place, untouched by empire and church alike, could be their haven. They descended carefully, keeping to the shadows until they reached the outskirts of the settlement. Villagers watched them warily, their eyes sharp and cautious. Miguel knelt, speaking gently in a local dialect he had learned from passing travelers. Clara followed his lead, offering a calm demeanor and small gestures of respect. Days passed, and slowly, the villagers accepted them, drawn by Miguel's skill in healing and Clara's industriousness. They were no longer fugitives in the immediate sense, though vigilance remained necessary. The valley offered concealment and sustenance, and for the first time in years, Clara and Miguel could envision a life beyond mere survival. Seasons changed, and the valley became a home in every sense. Clara and Miguel worked side by side with the villagers, planting crops, tending animals, repairing roofs, and sharing knowledge. The villagers, once suspicious, grew to trust and even admire them. Miguel healed the sick with gentle hands and wise words, blending remedies he had learned from travelers with knowledge passed down in whispers from older healers. Clara became a quiet but formidable presence, organizing work, teaching the children, and cultivating a garden so abundant that it fed the entire settlement. Yet even amid this fragile peace, the shadow of their past never fully lifted. Travelers who passed through occasionally whispered of the runaway heiress and the apostate priest, embellishing the story with each retelling. Some said they had divine protection, others that they had committed blasphemies, and still others claimed that Clara possessed a rare beauty that bewitched men and women alike. The legend, growing with each retelling, was both a shield and a danger. One cold evening, as the wind howled through the valley and rattled the wooden shutters of the huts, Miguel sat by the fire, tracing the lines of an old map. "There are other valleys," he said, voice low, "places even further north where no one dares to go. We could move again if necessary." Clara, sitting beside him, stirred the embers with a stick. "We have survived so much already," she said. "Perhaps now it is time to build something that lasts. We cannot keep running forever." Miguel nodded slowly, understanding the truth in her words. "Perhaps you are right," he murmured. "But we must remain vigilant. Even here, the past can reach us if we are careless." Days passed in routine, tending fields, repairing huts, gathering firewood, and sharing meals by the river. Each evening, they would walk to the edge of the cliffs, watching the sun dip behind distant mountains, and speak quietly of a life that could be theirs. They spoke of children, a modest home, and a place where love was neither crime nor scandal, but the natural law of their existence. One morning, Clara awoke to find Miguel gone from their hut. Panic gripped her chest, but she quickly gathered herself and went to the river. There, Miguel was crouched by the water, studying the tracks of animals, or perhaps humans. "Someone has passed through recently," he said quietly when she approached, his eyes scanning the trees. "I do not know if they are friends or enemies." Clara's heart tightened. "Do you think they are hunters from the Empire?" "Perhaps," Miguel admitted. "Or merely travelers who have stumbled upon our valley. Either way, we must be cautious. We cannot allow our sanctuary to be discovered." For weeks, they monitored the valley's surroundings, learning to read the subtle signs of intrusion, broken branches, footprints in mud, faint smoke from distant fires. They taught the villagers to be cautious as well, blending seamlessly into the life of the valley while remaining ever vigilant. Then came the day when a stranger arrived, not by accident, but deliberately. A man, cloaked and cautious, approached the village. His eyes were sharp, and his manner careful, as though he measured every word before speaking. He asked for shelter and food, claiming to be a traveler seeking work. Miguel and Clara exchanged glances. They sensed something dangerous in his presence, but they could not act rashly. Over the following days, the man ingratiated himself with the villagers, asking subtle questions about outsiders, the surrounding lands, and the patterns of the valley. Miguel watched him carefully, studying his movements and interactions. Clara remained close to him, always alert, always protective. One night, as the fire crackled and the valley slept, Miguel whispered to Clara, "He is not here by chance. He seeks us." Clara's grip tightened on his arm. "Then we must decide. Do we flee again, or do we prepare to defend the life we have built?" Miguel's jaw tightened. "We have survived by running. But perhaps now it is time to stand. To protect what is ours, even if the world demands otherwise." And so they began to prepare. Hidden in the forest, they set watch, learning the stranger's patterns. They taught the villagers to recognize signs of danger and to take precautions without causing panic. Every day was a lesson in vigilance, every night a test of endurance. The valley, once a haven, had become a fortress of sorts. And Clara and Miguel, forged by love and exile, stood at its heart, determined to defend their freedom, their love, and the fragile life they had built together. Yet even as they prepared, the winds of destiny whispered warnings. The world beyond the cliffs remained relentless, and the empire, the church, and those who sought revenge would not rest. Every moment of peace was borrowed, every smile hard-won. And somewhere, beyond the mountains and rivers, the shadows of the past gathered, waiting for the day when Clara and Miguel would have to confront them once more. Their love, once a scandal whispered across towns and villages, had become a force of survival. And as long as they stood together, hand in hand, they were unbroken, even if the world sought to crush them. Yet, they both understood that the past would never fully release them. Rumors of their existence continued to trickle into the wider world, carried by traders and wanderers. They knew the empire could still reach them if someone revealed their location, but for now, they had carved a fragile sanctuary. In the evenings, as the sun set behind the cliffs and painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Clara and Miguel would sit by the river, hands entwined. They spoke quietly of their future, of a home built with their own hands, of children who would know love but not the chains of wealth or the judgment of the church. And though the world beyond the mountains remained relentless, Clara and Miguel found in each other a freedom that no empire, no law, and no ecclesiastical decree could take away. Their exile had forged them into beings of resilience, courage, and unwavering love, a love that, against all odds, refused to be extinguished. With each passing day, their legend grew in whispers across the valleys and villages. Travelers spoke of the woman who had abandoned fortune for love and the priest who defied vows for the same reason. And while the empire and the church might never forgive, Clara and Miguel had discovered a truth that was theirs alone, that love, when seized with courage and defiance, could survive anything, even exile, pursuit, and the weight of a world determined to erase it. Spring gave way to summer, and the valley thrived under Clara and Miguel's quiet stewardship. Fields of corn and wheat ripened in the sun, chickens scratched through the underbrush, and the small huts, once dilapidated, were repaired and expanded. The villagers, once hesitant, now regarded the couple with respect bordering on reverence. Miguel's healing touch eased ailments, while Clara's meticulous organization ensured the valley never lacked food or order. Yet even in this seeming peace, the past remained a restless shadow. Travelers occasionally wandered too close, whispers of their story floating on the wind. Some spoke in awe, others with judgment, and a few with malice. Clara and Miguel had long learned that even here, safety was never guaranteed. The world beyond the valley's cliffs remained unpredictable, and those who sought vengeance or retribution could arrive at any moment. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the northern mountains, painting the valley in deep orange and violet, Miguel brought Clara to a hidden glade near the river. He knelt, tracing symbols in the dirt with a stick. "There are paths further north," he said, voice steady but eyes wary. "Settlements untouched by the church or empire. If we move again, we could secure a sanctuary that is truly ours." Clara studied the symbols, the lines forming routes through forests, over rivers, and around cliffs. "And if they follow us?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Miguel's gaze met hers. "Then we will move as we have always done, together, and ahead of them. But perhaps it is time to consider another path. Not just survival, but building a life that cannot be erased." In the weeks that followed, they continued to strengthen the valley. They trained the villagers in vigilance, how to detect intruders, read the land, and hide in plain sight. They reinforced the huts and created hidden caches of food, water, and supplies. Every action was careful, deliberate, a preparation not just for survival but for the inevitable confrontation with the outside world. One night, Miguel awoke to the distant sound of hoofbeats and the faint crack of a twig. His heart leapt. Clara, sensing his alarm, rose quietly beside him. Together, they moved through the forest, shadows among shadows, until they glimpsed figures approaching, a small band of men, cautious and deliberate, clearly searching. "They have found the trail," Miguel whispered. Clara's hands clenched. "Then we do what we must. We protect this valley, this life, and each other." They returned to the village at dawn, gathering the villagers and instructing them to stay hidden, while Miguel and Clara set out to create diversions and false trails. The men approached the outskirts of the settlement, only to find signs of habitation that led them astray, footprints heading in multiple directions, smoke from abandoned fire pits, and scattered supplies that suggested movement. The hunters, frustrated and confused, lingered, unaware that the true inhabitants watched silently from the forest, every sense alert. Miguel and Clara moved like shadows among the trees, anticipating each step, each glance. They had learned the art of elusiveness, honed by years of flight, and they wielded it now to protect their sanctuary. As the hunters finally turned back, convinced the valley was abandoned or too well hidden, Clara exhaled deeply, her body relaxing for the first time in days. Miguel took her hand. "We survived again," he said, voice low and steady. "But we cannot rest too long. The world is relentless." Clara nodded, the weight of months of tension heavy on her shoulders. "Then we build, Miguel. Not just hiding, not just surviving, but creating something permanent. For us, for the villagers, for the love that has carried us this far." And so they began to plan. They mapped the valley, identified fertile land for expansion, and created small workshops and gardens that would sustain them through harsh seasons. They trained the villagers to be self-reliant, to read the land, and to guard their secrets without fear. Slowly, the valley transformed from a refuge into a thriving, self-contained community, hidden from the eyes of empire and church alike. Yet even as they built, the story of the runaway heiress and the apostate priest continued to ripple outward. Traders spoke of them with awe and fear, poets composed verses of their defiance, and the church fumed in distant cities over their escape. Clara and Miguel had become legends, living embodiments of rebellion and forbidden love. At night, beneath the endless canopy of stars, they would sit together by the river, speaking quietly of the future. "We have survived the empire," Clara would say. "We have evaded the church. Now, we must ensure that what we have built endures, even if the world comes for us again." Miguel would nod, his gaze steady on the horizon. "We are unbroken. And as long as we are together, there is no force in the world that can take that from us. Let them chase ghosts. Let them speak in whispers. We have each other, and that is enough." In the quiet of the hidden valley, two hearts, scarred and tested by exile, continued to beat in defiance of the world, a love that refused to bow, a sanctuary built not from stone or gold, but from courage, resilience, and an unyielding will to be free. The seasons passed, and the hidden valley became a sanctuary not only for Clara and Miguel but for those who sought refuge from a world ruled by rigid laws and cruel hierarchies. Children played along the riverbanks, their laughter echoing across the cliffs. The villagers worked together, cultivating fields, tending animals, and sharing the knowledge that Miguel and Clara imparted. Every act of daily life became an affirmation. They were alive, and they belonged to each other, and to this land they had carved from exile. Clara, once a girl forced into silk and chains, now walked barefoot among the fields, her hands strong from labor and her gaze steady with resolve. Miguel, once a man bound by vows and the judgment of the church, moved through the valley with quiet authority, a healer, a teacher, a partner, and a lover. They had forged themselves anew in fire and flight, and in the process, the world that had sought to destroy them had only strengthened them. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Miguel led Clara to the cliff overlooking the valley. The wind carried the scent of pine, wildflowers, and the river below. He took her hands in his. "We have endured everything," he said, voice steady but heavy with emotion. "The empire, the church, the hunt, they all sought to claim us, to erase us. But here, together, we have found life. Not as fugitives, not as legends, but as ourselves." Clara's eyes glistened with tears, and she pressed her forehead to his. "We have survived everything. And now we can finally live. Truly live." Below them, the valley thrived, a testament to their courage, love, and perseverance. Fires burned in hearths, children laughed in the fields, and the villagers moved with purpose and peace. Every corner of the valley whispered a story of resilience and freedom, a life built not from wealth or inheritance, but from choice and love. And in that moment, standing together beneath the vast sky, Clara and Miguel understood that they had not only escaped their past, they had conquered it. The empire and the church could no longer reach them. Their love, tested and tempered by exile, had become stronger than any decree, any pursuit, any scandal. Years later, the story of the runaway heiress and the priest became legend, told in hushed tones in distant towns and villages, a tale of defiance, courage, and love that refused to be bound by law or expectation. But within the valley, there was no scandal, no pursuit, only life. A life of labor, of laughter, of quiet evenings by the fire, of mornings in the fields, of hands clasped and hearts united. Clara and Miguel, once hunted, once exiled, had finally found their home. Not in a palace, not in wealth, not in the approval of the powerful, but in each other, in the freedom they had carved from the wilderness, and in the lives they had touched with courage, compassion, and love. And so, their story, one of scandal, flight, fear, and defiance, found its true ending, not in ashes or exile, but in life. In a hidden valley where two souls, against all odds, chose love over obedience, freedom over duty, and each other over the world. They had escaped the chains of their past and, in doing so, had discovered what it truly meant to live. The sun set over the valley, casting a golden glow that seemed to bless the land itself. And in that light, Clara and Miguel walked hand in hand, no longer fugitives, no longer hunted, but free, at last, free. The end.